Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our weekly question and answer broadcast. So we had quite a few questions this week. I think I deleted maybe half of them. For various reasons. A lot of questions that were speculative or deeply theoretical, and some were a combination of both, I think. So, and there were quite a few questions that I think are good questions. They're just not questions that, it's not really how I envisioned this platform. Unfortunately, I'm not a professor in Buddhism. It's not what I do. So spending all the time answering such questions is not my preferred activity. So we're trying to answer questions about people's meditation practice, mostly. Or that, really ones that relate to, as I've said before, people who are in trouble, people who are having issues, something that is truly an issue in your life, especially relating to meditation. That's what we're interested in trying to help. Not really interested in engaging in theoretical discussion about the intricacies and details of Buddhism. A lot of it is the question you have to ask, as I've said before, what good does an answer to that question do you? And I think, especially for newcomers to Buddhism, there is required this realization, or this opening up to the idea that intellectual understanding is not really that valuable. It's certainly not that valued in Buddhism, whether you agree with that or not. That's where we are. So, also we have 13 questions left, so there were quite a few. So you could say we're just taking, in some specific set of criteria, we're taking the best questions. So it's not that other questions were bad, it's just under these criteria, these ones are best. So here's a question about how to what advice do we have for survivors of childhood sexual trauma in terms of healing moving forward? I think this is a good question to talk about. It deals with the past. In general terms, in regards to relating to the past, relating to efficacious, events in the past that have an effect, and had such an effect that they still seem to cause repercussions into the present moment. So those events, singular, plural, are so powerful that even though they happened a long time ago, they are still able to influence the present. Some of you probably can appreciate that that's not exactly the case. If you studied Buddhism, you can, or studied psychology, or if you think about it, if you just think about it, you can see that there's an issue there. It's the issue with relating what's happening in the present with what happened in the past too closely, or putting too much emphasis on that event. And that's the first thing I would say, is that we have to separate the fact that we have to separate the event that happened, the fact that that event happened, from the fact that we are experiencing trauma in the present moment. It's important to understand that there are many reasons why we are experiencing what we're experiencing in the present moment. If a certain event happens to one person and a certain event happens to another person, they're going to have a different experience moving forward. That's not to say that there wasn't an extremely overwhelming consequence or result of being sexually traumatized as a child. Of course, there's no doubt there. The point is to understand that what we're talking about is what's happening in the present. And so the biggest first step is to let go of the past. And that sounds like a really horrible sort of advice, like, oh, easy to say, right? Much more difficult to do. It's merely letting go of the thought or the point of view that this has anything to do with the past, or that the past is at all useful for us to reflect, to bring into our healing process. Because that event is never going to change. The things that have happened in the past are never going to change. They might change in how we perceive them. We might forget, or we might incorrectly, or our memories of them might change, or might be flawed. But the event itself will never change. And more importantly, our conception of the event as an event will never change. We can't unlive that event. We can't have that event not have happened. Meaning we can't fix it. It's broken. It's committed. It's unhealable. And so any dwelling on the event itself, although the memories come up, that's a different thing. The conceptual, or taking it as a view or a point of view as those relating to those events is going to stop us from healing. We have to think, who am I now? And rather than relating who I am now to what's happened in the past, relate it to the components. What is it made up of? Oh, here there's sadness. Here there's fear. Here there's depression. Here there's anger. Here there's longing, wishing I was different, wishing I was more free of this, wishing to be free of it. All of these things have nothing to do with the past, or what they have to do with the past, because of course they have a lot to do with the past, is useless to us. Their relationship to the past is not going to help our healing. We have developed, for various reasons, many of them surrounding particularly traumatizing events, for various reasons, we have developed certain habits. Those habits are now, they define who we are. But they're just habits. We developed them, and by processing them, by learning about them, by observing and refining our reactions to them, we can unlearn the habits. We can naturally unlearn the bad habits, because through observation the mind is unable, through detailed observation, it's unable to continue bad habits. Anything that hurts the mind, anything that causes stress, it's not even a question of deciding I'll give that up. It's just a question of seeing it so glaringly, obviously, as a cause for suffering, that the mind is just unable to continue. The mind it doesn't happen. That's how suffering works. Suffering isn't because we want to suffer, it's because we decide to do things that cause us suffering. It's that we don't even realize. We don't see clearly. Freedom from suffering comes simply from seeing that it's causing you suffering. Now, not simply, simply but not easily. It's something that takes effort. So, as you approach meditation, it's important to include in that a shift in the way you look at the experiences, rather than relating them to the past, to just looking at the experiences in the present moment, the constituents, the parts of your experience, the emotions. If it's a memory of something, even if it's a visual, well, that visual is happening now. That memory is happening now. It's called a memory just because we call it that. It's actually an experience of thought, an experience of visual, maybe sound, maybe feeling, so many different things. All of those things are happening now, and that's an important shift that we have to make. Not easy. I'm not trying to trivialize the process, but trying to help, redirect rather than delving into the past. I think that's totally useless and misguided. Not totally useless, it's roundabout, it's abstract. So any benefit you get from it is going to be limited. There are benefits to delving into the past, but they're limited and they're far less useful and helpful and healing than simply learning about what you're experiencing in the present and coming to see it as present experiences arising and ceasing, and slowly, naturally letting go of your attachments. Okay, every time the first time I click on the done button, it just spins forever. Now I think if I refresh the tab, it's going to work fine from here on in. But there's a problem with our website. It should never spin like that, right? Or there's a problem with my... No, but it's not just this computer. Various different machines I've had this problem with. So it didn't actually... The check mark, I pressed the check mark, didn't do anything. I've refreshed the page, and again the check mark doesn't do anything. Spinning. Well, there you go. Write this one down as well. We are going to log all of this, so our IT team believes me. When watching the rising and falling of the abdomen, I find that I try to control it instead of just watching it. Is this a consequence of being aware, or is there a way to just be an observer of it? What you are describing is the process of practicing vipassana meditation. Vipassana meditation is to see three things: that the things that we think are constant, stable, lasting, predictable, are inconstant, unstable, not lasting, not predictable. That the things that we think are satisfying, pleasurable, happiness, are not satisfying or true happiness. And three, that the things which we think are me, mine, under my control, are not me, not mine, not under my control. So, you trying to control is not a consequence of being aware. It's a consequence of thinking it's good to control, it's possible to control, it's the proper response to control, it's wrong view. It's what we're trying to cure through insight. And what you're doing when you describe this to us is, what you're describing is the process of the mind coming to understand that controlling things is not just impossible, but it's also a cause of suffering, cause of stress. So is there a way to just be an observer of it? Well, become enlightened. Let go of this. Let go of this wrong view, wrong perception, wrong idea. And the only way to do that, of course, is to show yourself. The real way. See, when we talk about vipassana, which is why we don't talk about it all that much, when we talk about it, it sounds like we're saying, look at these things, look for these things, and remind yourself of these things, which were not at all. You should never be reminding yourself, this is impermanent, this is suffering, this is non-self. That's not useful. It's detrimental usually, because it's misguided. Mindfulness is the practice that we do. By simply observing and cultivating objective observation through using the mantra to remind yourself, it's just this, it's just this. You're going to see things like this. Oh yes, these things that I'm trying to control, well, that's stressful. And then you observe some more and you say, oh yes, look at me trying to control. Like hitting your head against the wall, until slowly, you start to realize, not intellectually, but through observation, through repeated observation, that this isn't the right way. There's no good that comes from this response. Same goes with impermanence, same goes with suffering. By clinging to things as stable, by trying to create stability, by chasing after things, hoping to be satisfied by things, no good there. See them as not that, and you let go of them. Okay, I can't push buttons anymore because it's just not working. I've got 2 spinning wheels. How do I follow him as a teacher more formally? I'm sure, assuming you're talking about me. We do online courses, so on this site you can find a way to do an online course, or if you're in the area, you can even come for an appointment every week. And you can go to our site, sirimangalo.org, and you can look at our courses there. So those are the ways. I feel like a failure. Does reality ever change? I almost deleted this one, but I think it's a good one, really. I mean, feeling like a failure. Does reality ever change? Well, I could be kind of make a quip about how, yes, reality is always changing, but that's not what you're asking. I feel like a failure. Well, it's quite possibly you're thinking of worldly pursuits. The only way to feel like a failure is if you have a goal, right? An expectation, which is ultimately problematic. It's reaching to the future, and it's a cause, as you can see, of stress when you fail to meet your goal, which is always going to be a problem as long as you have goals. On the other hand, there is a way we could talk about failure to become enlightened. We're all failures, in a sense. But there's hope for us all, especially humans. Being born a human being is a cause for great hope. And it may not seem like it, but it's often the case where progress is being made as a human being. As a human being, seeing suffering, seeing the mistakes we make, seeing how craving does lead to clinging, which leads to anxiety and stress and suffering. All of these things are potential progress. And sometimes you have to feel like a failure before you can let go. You have to realize that you're not going to be Superman, Superwoman. You're not going to be famous or rich. Even maybe realizing you're not going to become enlightened in this life. I mean, it's quite helpful for helping us let go of our expectations and our stresses, our anxiety about living up to some ideal. Meditation isn't really about achieving goals or being a success. Success comes from letting go. It doesn't come from clinging, striving, exactly. The Buddha talked a lot about striving. And so striving is a huge part of it, but striving is a great thing that you can always do. And stop striving for goals or for success in this or that. Start striving to not strive, in a sense. Striving to not crave, to not seek. Seek to not seek. Well, seek to be free, seek to let go, seek to see clearly, which the great thing is you can always do. You can do any time. Even if you're dying, even if you're poor, even if you're in great pain, even when you're working, even when you're taking care of family, it can all, the striving to become enlightened can happen at any time. Does reality ever change? Reality is always changing, that's the first answer, but more to your question, what do I understand is your question. We always have the potential to change. The failures in this life are going to have consequences, but those consequences are as temporary as the cause. And so there's always hope in the future. There's always opportunity to become free from suffering. It's quite liberating, you know. I've told this story before. I had a Catholic friend, and we were in Buddhism class together, and when she was just learning about Buddhism, and she came up to me afterwards and she said, "It's so refreshing to think that we can be reborn again and again and again, and it's not just one shot, and if we get it wrong we go to hell. You don't have to worry, because I mean it's kind of worrisome to think that you might be lost in samsara for life after life after life, but the great thing is there's always hope. You're never doomed. There is doom in Buddhism, but it's temporary, like everything else. So rejoice in the fact that you're even asking this question, that you're even considering bettering yourself, you're even considering trying to find a better way, trying to become free from suffering. Many people are just lost and engaged in all sorts of unwholesome activities just to get what they want, building up more and more want, and they're in for a big shock when it finally comes crashing down. Are these terms just concepts, such as the existence of a mind, body, and karma, and the only thing that's real is arising and ceasing of all experiences? So real is a word that means different things depending on the context. Rather than say this is real, this isn't real, per se, we can talk about the frame of reference that is experiential reality. So experiential reality is real in ways that all of those things aren't, meaning it's very first-hand. It doesn't require something else to exist, right? Like a concept of a mind requires us to conceive of it. Karma requires us to conceive of it. The reality of things arising and ceasing is very first-hand. Turns out to be really the only thing that's first-hand. So it's just different levels of what you might call real. Is it wrong to think that psychedelic drugs can be enlightening? And then there's a long description. So enlightening, yes, it is wrong to think that they are enlightening. And people have railed against this sort of an answer. We've had this question many times. But the point is that becoming enlightened is something fairly deep. Like it's not specific. It's not like it's over here on the side and there's all this other stuff that's equally valid. Enlightenment is the way. I mean, it is the only solution. From a Buddhist perspective, it's central. It's in everyone's best interest to become enlightened. But it's very deep, you know. It's not just about, oh, I get impermanence or suffering or non-self. I understand reality. My mind has been opened. There are many things that can open your mind. I mean, getting in a car accident can really open your mind. Having heart surgery, having a near-death experience is incredibly mind-opening. Taking psychedelic drugs, yes, mind-opening in various ways. can also mess up your brain, from my experience, but can be quite positive. But it's much more circumstantial and arbitrary, I suppose. I mean, it's your own perception of the things. You see something strange. We might, from a Buddhist perspective, say that seeing something strange is always eye-opening, because it's an experience of impermanence. You thought things were like this, you experience them like that, and it's really a shock. So many things can be like that. You might even argue that childhood sexual trauma can be a catalyst for spiritual practice. That a person who didn't experience that maybe would have just gone through their life blissfully ignorant of suffering. Does that mean it was a good thing? No. Of course not. It was a horrible thing. I guess you could argue that it was much worse for the person performing the act, because there's really no way they could ever cultivate spirituality if they've done such horrible things. But it's suffering. I mean, these are bad things. The Buddha has said, that suffering can be a cause for enlightenment. When you suffer a lot, he said it on various occasions. Not a lot, but through suffering comes happiness. Suffering leads to waking up. I mean, it's a shame that it sometimes has to come to those extremes. But, the same goes for things like psychedelic drugs. It's probably, I would still say, a negative experience, and I'm going to get in trouble from... I've done psychedelic drugs. I've never done really hard. I've never done acid. But I did quite a bit of mushrooms. And I don't think it was helpful for my enlightenment, for leading me towards enlightenment. I don't think it's brought me closer to enlightenment, but I can understand how it would change their lives and maybe lead them to spirituality. Quite potentially lead them to spirituality. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on that. I just wanted to point that out, that becoming enlightened is something very intricate, delicate. It's not just something you fall upon by taking some drugs. Not that I think that's what you're suggesting. I'd like to incorporate chanting into my practice. Yeah, I don't really have detailed advice for that. Good for you, great. Chanting can be beneficial, but I don't have a specific guide. Okay, the guide that the Buddha gave is to recite the qualities of the Buddha, the qualities of the Dhamma, the qualities of the Sangha. So if you can find that, the Dajjaga Sutta, how do you translate it? The top of the banner or something like the banner discourse. Dajja is flag or something, and Agga is the top. So you look at the top of the flagpole, you see a flag. Read the sutta, you'll understand. But that's where we get that from. The Buddha said, chant that. What is the relationship between karma and morality? I suppose that's a good question. Morality is proper actions of speech and body, or the refraining from improper, the refraining of acts and speech that are motivated by impure mental activity, like a desire to hurt, a desire to harm. So karma involves the commission of acts and speech, and even thoughts, that are unwholesome or wholesome, right? There's good karma. So morality is the affecting of a positive inclination, a karmic inclination. So you're less and potentially not at all committing unwholesome deeds of body and speech. It doesn't relate to the mind, the thoughts. technically speaking. I mean, in ultimate sense, you could say it's immoral to have bad thoughts, but it's not included under the first training, which is called sila. First training is body and speech. It's the first part. The second part, samadhi, relates more to mental activity, the causes of unwholesome bodily and verbal acts. I'm not sure what else you're asking here, but morality is probably more important than concerning with karma, though karma is a Buddhist doctrine. Morality is more to the point. But they are related, yes, as I've said. So I looked at this video of Ajahn Tong. I didn't watch it all, I just got it just before I started broadcasting, but he starts off talking about how his appreciation for the samijikamma, which is the paying respect. So when we enter into the reins, it's an entering the reins talk. When we enter the reins, before that, we pay respect to elder monks. The juniors pay respect to the elders, and so he said he appreciates that, and it's a continuation of the Buddha's teaching. And then he started talking about the Ovada. He said when we enter into the reins, we should keep in mind the Buddha's teaching. He didn't just... And then I think he was saying that, because there was actually a word I didn't understand, but he said the Buddha didn't just enlighten us or help us on his own. He had to use the teachings. So remember the teachings as well. And he started into the Ovada Patimokkha, which is it's a very famous teaching of the Buddha. And that's as far as I got. I assume much of the rest of the talk was going through the Ovada Patimokkha. The thing about Ajahn Tong's talks, I mean, especially as he gets older, is his memory is not perfect. There's no getting around that. And his memory is really great for concepts, but remembering the Pali, he's not, I mean, he never was perfect at it. Especially the Ovada Patimokkha. I mean, I'm sorry, I hope this isn't irreverent, because I have the highest respect for him. But he often gets the Pali. He's in fact, one time before he was to give a talk on the Ovada Patimokkha, one of the high-up monks brought him a version of it, because they were concerned, I guess. And he didn't get it right. I was there and watching him receive this, and he said, "Oh, thank you," and he's very happy to get it, but he didn't. So the point being, his talks are often, if you were to transcribe them and turn them into a book, you'd have to do a lot of editing. Not just the Pali, but the Thai. I mean, on a positive side, and it's not a negative, I mean, from my point of view, but the positive is he's so present. Like, sometimes he'll lose his train of thought and just keep going. Because he's very present all the time. And so his delivery is quite powerful, and that's a big part of why he's able to, he's found to be quite impressive by monks that it's very hard to impress. I've seen the highest monks in Thailand tremble and express their great appreciation for him. And he says simple things. It's kind of, I mean, that's the kind of story you hear about monks like that. Ajahn Chah, people said that sort of thing about him, I think. I don't know much about Ajahn Chah, but I mean, watch the talk. Just watch him. Might be interesting to see someone who's quite special. I think there's no getting around saying that. But yeah, I'm not going to do subtitles. It doesn't really work out the way you might think. Especially also because Thai and English are just very different languages. I got a few questions this week about eggs, and so what do I have to say about eggs? Mahasi Sayadaw seemed to fall on the side of of saying that all eggs should be considered potentially fertilized. We really don't know. Just because there was no fertilization from a male, even then, the potential for spontaneously arisen beings, he said, which seems a bit sketchy from a scientific point of view, but there is a potential there from a Buddhist perspective that these eggs have a being in them, even if there was no male to fertilize them. I mean, didn't we have in that book Jurassic Park, there was a description of these dinosaurs or amphibians that are able to self-fertilize their eggs and so on. Or females become males or something like that. So it's not certain, he said. But then he said, I guess it's an escape because you don't know whether it's fertilized. And if you don't know that there's a being there, you can't be held responsible for killing it. So if you want to be very strict, eggs are something that should concern you if you're going to cook them. If they're already cooked, well, you aren't the one responsible for the killing. But yeah, I mean, eggs, there's ethical issues around that as well. The egg industry is just terrible. So you have to concern yourself with that as well. And then what do they do with the chickens when they get old? Well, they just end up killing them and whatever, keeping them in cages. So if you want to get away from it, not eating eggs is potentially wholesome. I wouldn't worry too much about it, though. I think there are things that we should be much more concerned about. Is it necessary to note thoughts which are fleeting for just milliseconds, right? So especially when walking. So let's be clear. The noting is not magic. It's not meant to be a magic wand that you point at things and that's the solution for them. Noting is helping cultivate a state of mind that is mindful. It's cultivating objectivity. You don't need to catch everything with a note. As long as you're noting and you're using it as a tool to redirect your mind to an objective state and keep your mind from falling into partiality, to judgment, reactivity, you're good. So you can ignore the fleeting thoughts if you like. If it's a lot of fleeting thoughts, then you'll want to stop and say distracted, or so on. But no, it's not necessary to note everything. What propels the stages of insight in motion for the yogi? Is it access, concentration? It's a curious question. I wouldn't want to say it's access, concentration. I would say it's mindfulness. Is access, concentration involved? Not precisely, but what we call momentary concentration. And momentary concentration is not called access in the sense that it's... The word access is misleading anyway because it's upachara, which really means neighborhood. Access in the sense of the access to a house, or the access in an urban context. You use the word access, but neighborhood, upachara, coming close to. So I guess access is okay. But it's meant in the sense of close to, the upachara. So momentary concentration, access concentration, what we call access, is meant to mean that which is on the verge of jhana. So it's getting to apana, it's leading there. Now, Khanika Samadhi won't lead to jhana in the same way. Though arguably it does lead to jhana at the moment of enlightenment, the moment of the magga and phala. But no, simply put, and more useful for our purposes, the stages of insight are propelled by mindfulness. It's mindfulness which propels them. Did the Buddha teach prayers or some Buddhist rituals? So I said he seems to have taught chants of sorts as protective verses because that's psychologically valuable. Even rituals, did the Buddha teach them? No, I don't think so. I mean, there are some things that monks have to do which you could see as ritualistic, but not really, no. All the rituals, they're not they're not bad. They may be a little misleading, but they're generally wholesome. They're generally a means of cultivating wholesome states, like bowing down to the Buddha image, even chanting, lighting candles, incense, giving flowers to the Buddha, walking around the pagoda 3 times, the Chaitya 3 times. It's for cultivating wholesomeness. There's nothing really unwholesome. A little misleading, maybe. You could argue that it's leading people to confuse what is essential with what is unessential. Like if I walked backwards around the pagoda, people would probably get upset at me. But is it really essential? I mean, I agree walking around to the right is good because that's what we agree upon, and because we agree that our right shoulder is somehow a way of paying respect and that sort of thing. There's no reason to it. I mean, it's just a ritual. It's just a convention. And mistaking those from what is essential is problematic. So, not quite your question, but yes, the Buddha did teach some prayers, not really rituals, I don't think. And that's all for tonight. There may be more, but I don't see them because the page isn't really working. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night.